This friend of mine, Kenny Strode, he was in my class. The two of us, apparently the jump was ready, the tracks were in, the snow was right, and we waited until the older kids had gone off to another ski meet, so there wasn't really anybody else around. All I remember from my very first jump was tipping my skis off the top platform, and then I don't remember anything else until I came out of the bottom of the transition on the landing. My friend Kenny came after. He was quite a bit smaller than me, so he didn't have the mass to get the speed to clear the knoll. So he hit very hard on the knoll. It bounced him up in the air, and he fell on that. We were both game for going back up again, and I think we made 2 more jumps that day. It was kind of a rite of passage, and normally you did that right around your 10th birthday. And if you didn't, you probably weren't going to do it. Most of the kids then that didn't, they went on and played basketball during the winter, and those that did skied. My name is Norm Zachary, and I'm going to try to provide a little of the history of the little ski hill. In the winter of 1954, we have logs coming off of Lick Creek Summit, probably some of the last loads that were going to be coming into the mill. And this is portrayed to show the connection between the main economy in town and what ultimately became the little ski hill. Corey would have gates set up for us to run as soon as we got to the hill. We attended school in the old schoolhouse up near where May Hardware is now, 1 through 8 grades. We would ski every afternoon, train every afternoon. Sometimes if we'd had a big snow, we'd spend a little time helping pack out the runs or the jumps before we began practice. But for the most part, everything was prepared for us. And we just got right to the practice itself. Corey himself was a 1948 Olympian for the U.S. in Nordic Combined, which was jumping and cross country. He placed 3rd in the jump in that event in the Olympics. The program was really fortunate to have someone of his stature and ability and so forth to want to come to McCall at Warren's bidding and help get the racing program firmly established. We pour out of school at the final bell and go down to load into the crummy. The crummy was a flatbed truck with benches built along the sides and covered with a canvas top. Nothing across the back, it was just open air. A lot of people didn't have individual cars at that time, and so it performed the function of primarily being a transport vehicle for the logging crews to get into the woods. As soon as that ceased, then that vehicle became available to the little hill. The lodge was constructed probably the year before, after a fire burned down the old log lodge that had been built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The ashes were still warm when Warren sent out slings of lumber. There was a temporary lodge erected in the matter of a couple days so that the hill hardly missed a beat for that very unfortunate event. And then the following summer, this lodge was built, and it's the one that's still in use pretty much in its entirety today. The group of skiers that we see here are, again, basically age 6 to 13. Most all of them fell under Corey Engen's tutelage. He had assistance from coaches like Ray Watkins, who'd also grown up in the area and was a good skier, and Alan Smith. Corey had the main responsibility for the kids that were a little further along in their skiing abilities. We often used the big jump landing just to develop an area to learn to pre-jump and handle speed in a tuck. A lot of our training was in quick succession, whether it was off the jump or running slalom or whatever. Kind of kept the pressure on in terms of completing your turns and not falling. Everything was done on wooden skis. You can see once you got locked in, those actually are jumpers because the tail isn't tied down. You'd have another clip right back near where that metal piece is, and that would hold the heel down. So that was what basically your downhill and slalom skis, ski bindings looked like. Corey gives us the demonstration of how to approach the end of the jump, and several of the boys have been off before. Here we have the initiation of Dickie Zimmerman, the littlest guy up there in the red sweater. He's supposed to be undertaking his initial jump, and he has second thoughts and tries to come back down, but the rest of the crew isn't having any part of it. Dickie's got to do it. So on to the top of this 70-foot high scaffold we go, and he does his best to express his lack of desire to make the jump this day, but this is his time. So in the manner that he'd gotten used to and jumping on the B jump, away he goes and off and away he is. Probably about a 140-foot jump. Jumping style in those days was primarily, well, skis together, arms basically stationary. We hadn't entered the era of hands back by the hips that was brought in a little bit later by the Finns in the mid to late 50s. But that was the style at this time. The hands were out kind of to the side and or overhead. This jump was considered a 60-meter jump, which meant that you could safely land about 185 to 90 feet without getting into the critical point where the landing would be flat. Here we have slalom practice, and you notice that the skis are longer, the poles are steel. We haven't entered the era of aluminum Scott poles and that type of thing. The boots are just basically shoe top height, very little ankle support. It's quite amazing that the turns could still be made with so little ankle support. This cross country, which was part of the four-way event, started up by the lodge, went out into Rock Flat, went north down the valley and around this huge boulder that I always assumed was the reason that Rock Flat was named Rock Flat, and then back up the valley and completed a loop that came in back by the lodge, all about 1.5 miles long. Right in front of us, right off this end of the lodge, would have been where the start and the finish of the cross country was. And it basically went out and around the parking lot area here and down the valley to the north. My recollection was it was about 1.5 miles. We go down around this big rock and come in right up above those trees right over there and finish right down here in front. Skis that were worn for this event was basically just skis where someone took a pair of alpine skis, ran them through a table saw to probably a 2 to 2.5 inch width, worked some pine tar into the base. We would take a pair of old regular height work shoes today down to the cobbler and have him sew some leather extensions on those shoes, and that became the portion that locked down on a couple of nubbins in the binding. Our downhill course, I don't believe there were any gates. It was just a road that ran through the trees, and it ran out to what would be the east side of the little ski hill. You'll see a few of the racers wearing pajamas over their long johns, and that was part of the gear. There wasn't a lot of focus on anything very fancy, as you'll see. The fact that these young people were exposed to this type of racing at such an early age with equipment that was kind of marginal at best paid dividends down the road when they were in high demand for particularly colleges that wanted skiers that knew how to do all 4 events. And downhill was certainly one of those. On this diagram, that was our downhill back in the trees. Ran out to the east side of the little ski hill. The slalom that you saw earlier was on run number 1, and I think there may still be some events being held there. Many of those, the giant slalom and slaloms, I think are now over on what we used to call run 2, which is, I believe, today called Lodge Face. But this just gives some idea of where these various events were held. This is the 30-meter hill that we'll see here again in a minute. The big jump here, and I point out this rather interesting fact that when I was quite young, there wasn't room enough for the jumpers to get stopped down here, and so they would actually ski across what was then State Highway 15, now 55, and up the bank on the opposite side to get stopped. There's Dave Engen, Corey's son. He's probably 13 his last year, and it looks like he's pretty much cleaned up in all the events. Now we have the senior racers, basically the high school age racers. Again, long skis, big poles, long poles with big baskets, boots that had virtually no support. Mountains to move, I got mountains. Mountains to move, I got mountains. Mountains to move. You can imagine that using that landing as a downhill training area with the speeds that you got there provided some pretty good feel for speed. There's a judge's stand. Still sits out in the same location today, minus, of course, the in-run scaffold. It becomes an extension of the community. The community needed something for everyone to have fun at. Warren's vision began with establishing the little ski hill and then getting community behind a program that would ultimately become one of the nation's premier young people racing programs. The way to make it work was through ingenuity, using the resources that we had here to build things like ski lifts, ski lodges, and so forth. And then that extended course, into other things. We had this wonderful lake where we could enjoy water sports in what would have been considered a very primitive fashion now, but was also a major activity for the community to participate in.
I lost my groove, I got to move on. Got mountains to move, I got mountains. 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 Mountains to move, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got my mountains to move, I got mountains. Mountains to move, I got mountains. Mountains to move, I got mountains. Mountains to move, yeah.